The Human Cycle by Sri Aurobindo. Chapter 24. The Advent and Progress of the Spiritual Age. If a subjective age, the last sector of a social cycle, is to find its outlet and fruition in a spiritualized society, and the emergence of mankind on a higher evolutionary level, it is not enough that certain ideas favorable to that turn of human life should take hold of the general mind of the race, permeate the ordinary motives of its thought, art, ethics, political ideals, social effort, or even get well into its inner way of thinking and feeling. It is not enough even that the idea of the kingdom of God on earth, a reign of spirituality, freedom, and unity, a real and inner equality and harmony, and not merely an outward and mechanical equalization and association, should become definitely an ideal of life. It is not enough that this ideal should be actively held as possible, desirable, to be sought and striven after. It is not enough even that it should come forward as a governing preoccupation of the human mind. That would evidently be a very great step forward, considering what the ideals of mankind now are, an enormous step. It would be the necessary beginning, the indispensable mental environment for a living renovation of human society in a higher type. But by itself, it might only bring about a half-hearted, or else a strong, but only partially and temporarily successful attempt to bring something of the manifest spirit into human life and its institutions. That is all that mankind has ever attempted on this line in the past. It has never attempted to work out thoroughly even that little, except in the limits of a religious order or a peculiar community. And even there with such serious defects and under such drastic limitations as to make the experiment nugatory and without any bearing on human life. If we do not get beyond the mere holding of the ideal and its general influence in human life, this little is all that mankind will attempt in the future. More is needed. A general spiritual awakening and aspiration in mankind is indeed the large, necessary motive power, but the effective power must be something greater. There must be a dynamic recreating of individual manhood in the spiritual type. For the way that humanity deals with an ideal is to be satisfied with it as an aspiration, which is, for the most part, left only as an aspiration, accepted only as a partial influence. The ideal is not allowed to mold the whole life, but only more or less to color it. It is often used even as a cover and a plea for things that are diametrically opposed to its real spirit. Institutions are created which are supposed, but too lightly supposed, to embody that spirit, and the fact that the ideal is held, the fact that men live under its institutions, is treated as sufficient. The holding of an ideal becomes almost an excuse for not living according to the ideal. The existence of its institutions is sufficient to abrogate the need of insisting on the spirit that made the institutions. But spirituality is in its very nature a thing subjective and not mechanical. It is nothing if it is not lived inwardly, and if the outward life does not flow out of this inward living. Symbols, types, conventions, ideas are not sufficient. A spiritual symbol is only a meaningless ticket unless the thing symbolized is realized in the spirit. A spiritual convention may lose or expel its spirit and become a falsehood. A spiritual type may be a temporary mold into which spiritual living may flow, but it is also a limitation and may become a prison in which it fossilizes and perishes. A spiritual idea is a power, but only when it is both inwardly and outwardly creative. Here we have to enlarge and to deepen the pragmatic principle that truth is what we create, and in this sense, first, that it is what we create within us. In other words, what we become. Undoubtedly, spiritual truth exists eternally beyond, independent of us, in the heavens of the Spirit. But it is of no avail for humanity here. It does not become the truth of earth, the truth of life, until it is lived. The divine perfection is always there above us. But for man to become divine in consciousness and act, and to live inwardly and outwardly the divine life, is what is meant by spirituality. All lesser meanings given to the word are inadequate fumblings or impostures. This, as the subjective religions recognize, can only be brought about by an individual change in each human life. The collective soul is there only as a great half-subconscious source of the individual existence. If it is to take on a definite psychological form, or a new kind of collective life, that can only come by the shaping growth of its individuals, as will be the spirit and life of the individuals constituting it, so will be the realized spirit of the collectivity and the true power of its life. A society that lives not by its men, but by its institutions, is not a collective soul, but a machine. Its life becomes a mechanical product and ceases to be a living growth. Therefore, the coming of a spiritual age must be preceded by the appearance of an increasing number of individuals who are no longer satisfied with the normal intellectual, vital, and physical existence of man, but perceive that a greater evolution is the real goal of humanity, and attempt to effect it in themselves, to lead others to it, and to make it the recognized goal of the race. In proportion as they succeed, and to the degree to which they carry this evolution, the yet unrealized potentiality which they represent will become an actual possibility of the future. A great access of spirituality in the past has ordinarily had for its result the coming of a new religion of a special type, and its endeavor to impose itself upon mankind as a new universal order. This, however, was always not only a premature, but a wrong crystallization, which prevented, rather than helped, any deep and serious achievement. The aim of a spiritual age of mankind must indeed be one with the essential aim of subjective religions, a new birth, a new consciousness, an upward evolution of the human being, a descent of the Spirit into our members, a spiritual reorganization of our life. But if it limits itself by the old familiar apparatus and the imperfect means of a religious movement, it is likely to register another failure. A religious movement brings usually a wave of spiritual excitement and aspiration that communicates itself to a large number of individuals. And there is, as a result, a temporary uplifting and an effective formation, partly spiritual, partly ethical, partly dogmatic in its nature. But the wave, after a generation or two, or at most a few generations, begins to subside. The formation remains. If there has been a very powerful movement with a great spiritual personality as its source, it may leave behind a central influence and an inner discipline, which may well be the starting point of fresh waves. But these will be constantly less powerful and enduring in proportion as the movement gets farther and farther away from its source. For meanwhile, in order to bind together the faithful, and at the same time to mark them off from the unregenerated outer world, there will have grown up a religious order, a church, a hierarchy, a fixed and unprogressive type of ethical living, a set of crystallized dogmas, ostentatious ceremonials, sanctified superstitions, an elaborate machinery for the salvation of mankind. As a result, spirituality is increasingly subordinated to intellectual belief, to outward forms of conduct, and to external ritual, the higher to the lower motives. The one thing essential to aids and instruments and accidents. The first spontaneous and potent attempt to convert the whole life into spiritual living yields up its place to a set system of belief and ethics touched by spiritual emotion. But finally, even that saving element is dominated by the outward machinery. The sheltering structure becomes a tomb. The church takes the place of the spirit, and a formal subscription to its creed, rituals, and order is the thing universally demanded. Spiritual living is only practiced by the few within the limits prescribed by their fixed creed and order. The majority neglect even that narrow effort and are contented to replace, by a careful or negligent piety, the call to a deeper life. In the end, it is found that the spirit in the religion has become a thin stream choked by sands. At the most, brief occasional floodings of its dry bed of conventions still prevent it from becoming a memory in the dead chapters of time. The ambition of a particular religious belief and form to universalize and impose itself is contrary to the variety of human nature, and to at least one essential character of the Spirit. For the nature of the Spirit is a spacious inner freedom and a large unity into which each man must be allowed to grow according to his own nature. Again, and this is yet another source of inevitable failure, the usual tendency of these creedal religions is to turn towards an afterworld and to make the regeneration of the earthly life a secondary motive. This tendency grows in proportion as the original hope of a present universal regeneration of mankind becomes more and more feeble. Therefore, while many new spiritual waves, with their strong special motives and disciplines, must necessarily be the forerunners of a spiritual age, yet their claims must be subordinated in the general mind of the race and of its spiritual leaders to the recognition that all motives and disciplines are valid, and yet none entirely valid, since they are means and not the one thing to be done. The one thing essential must take precedence: the conversion of the whole life of the human being to the lead of the Spirit. The ascent of man into heaven is not the key, but rather his ascent here into the Spirit, and the descent also of the Spirit into his normal humanity, and the transformation of this earthly nature. For that, and not some post-mortem salvation, is the real new birth, for which humanity waits, as the crowning movement of its long, obscure, and painful course. Therefore, the individuals who will most help the future of humanity in the new age will be those who will recognize a spiritual evolution as the destiny, and therefore the great need of the human being. Even as the animal man has been largely converted into a mentalized, and at the top a highly mentalized humanity, so too now, or in the future, an evolution or conversion, it does not greatly matter which figure we use, or what theory we adopt to support it, of the present type of humanity into a spiritualized humanity is the need of the race, and surely the intention of nature. That evolution or conversion will be their ideal and endeavor. They will be comparatively indifferent to particular belief and form, and leave men to resort to the beliefs and forms to which they are naturally drawn. They will only hold as essential the faith in this spiritual conversion, the attempt to live it out, and whatever knowledge, the form of opinion into which it is thrown does not so much matter, can be converted into this living. They will especially not make the mistake of thinking that this change can be effected by machinery, and outward institutions. They will know and never forget that it has to be lived out by each man inwardly, or it can never be made a reality for the kind. They will adopt in its heart of meaning the inward view of the East, which bids man seek the secret of his destiny and salvation within. But also they will accept, though with a different turn given to it, the importance which the West rightly attaches to life and to the making the best we know and can attain, the general rule of all life. They will not make society a shadowy background to a few luminous spiritual figures, or a rigidly fenced and earthbound route for the growth of a comparatively rare and sterile flower of ascetic spirituality. They will not accept the theory that the many must necessarily remain forever on the lower ranges of life, and only a few climb into the free air and the light, but will start from the standpoint of the great spirits who have striven to regenerate the life of the earth and held that faith in spite of all previous failure. Failures must be originally numerous in everything great and difficult, but the time comes when the experience of past failures can be profitably used, and the gate that so long resisted opens. In this, as in all great human aspirations and endeavors, an a priori declaration of impossibility is a sign of ignorance and weakness, and the motto of the aspirant's endeavor must be the solvitur ambulando of the discoverer, for by the doing the difficulty will be solved. A true beginning has to be made. The rest is a work for time in its sudden achievements or its long, patient labor. The thing to be done is as large as human life, and therefore the individuals who lead the way will take all human life for their province. These pioneers will consider nothing as alien to them, nothing as outside their scope, for every part of human life has to be taken up by the spiritual, not only the intellectual, the aesthetic, the ethical, but the dynamic, the vital, the physical. Therefore, for none of these things, or the activities that spring from them, will they have contempt or aversion. However they may insist on a change of the spirit and a transmutation of the form. In each power of our nature, they will seek for its own proper means of conversion, knowing that the divine is concealed in all. They will hold that all can be made the Spirit's means of self-finding, and all can be converted into its instruments of divine living. And they will see that the great necessity is the conversion of the normal into the spiritual mind, and the opening of that mind again into its own higher reaches and more integral movement. For before the decisive change can be made, the stumbling intellectual reason has to be converted into the precise and luminous intuitive, until that again can rise into higher ranges to overmind and supermind, or gnosis. The uncertain and stumbling mental will has to rise towards the sure intuitive and into a higher divine and Gnostic will, the psychic sweetness, fire, and light of the soul behind the heart, has to alchemize our crude emotions and the hard egoisms and clamant desires of our vital nature. All our other members have to pass through a similar conversion under the compelling force and light from above. The leaders of the spiritual march will start from and use the knowledge and the means that past effort has developed in this direction, but they will not take them as they are, without any deep necessary change, or limit themselves by what is now known, or cleave only to fixed and stereotyped systems or given groupings of results, but will follow the method of the Spirit in nature. A constant rediscovery and new formulation and larger synthesis in the mind, a mighty remolding in its deeper parts, because of a greater enlarging truth, not discovered or not well fixed before, is that Spirit's way with our past achievement, when he moves to the greatnesses of the future. This endeavor will be a supreme and difficult labor, even for the individual, but much more for the race. It may well be that once started, it may not advance rapidly, even to its first decisive stage. It may be that it will take long centuries of effort to come into some kind of permanent birth. But that is not altogether inevitable. For the principle of such changes in nature seems to be a long, obscure preparation, followed by a swift gathering up and precipitation of the elements into the new birth, a rapid conversion, a transformation that in its luminous moment figures like a miracle. Even when the first decisive change is reached, it is certain that all humanity will not be able to rise to that level. There cannot fail to be a division into those who are able to live on the spiritual level and those who are only able to live in the light that descends from it into the mental level. And below these two, there might still be a great mass influenced from above, but not yet ready for the light. But even that would be a transformation, and a beginning far beyond anything yet attained. This hierarchy would not mean, as in our present vital living, an egoistic domination of the undeveloped by the more developed, but a guidance of the younger by the elder brothers of the race, and a constant working to lift them up to a greater spiritual level and wider horizons. And for the leaders, too, this ascent to the first spiritual levels would not be the end of the divine march, a culmination that left nothing more to be achieved on earth, for there would be still yet higher levels within the supramental realm, as the old Vedic poets knew when they spoke of the spiritual life as a constant ascent. The priests of the word climb thee like a ladder, O 100-powered. As one ascends from peak to peak, there is made clear the much that has still to be done. But once the foundation has been secured, the rest develops by a progressive self-unfolding, and the soul is sure of its way, as again it is phrased by the ancient Vedic singers. State is born upon state, covering after covering becomes conscious of knowledge. In the lap of the mother, the soul sees. This, at least, is the highest hope, the possible destiny that opens out before the human view. And it is a possibility which the progress of the human mind seems on the way to redevelop. If the light that is being born increases, if the number of individuals who seek to realize the possibility in themselves and in the world grows large, and they get nearer the right way, then the Spirit who is here in man, now a concealed divinity, a developing light and power, will descend more fully as the avatar of a yet unseen and unguessed Godhead from above into the soul of mankind, and into the great individualities in whom the light and power are the strongest. There will then be fulfilled the change that will prepare the transition of human life from its present limits into those larger and purer horizons. The earthly evolution will have taken its grand impetus upward and accomplished the revealing step in a divine progression of which the birth of thinking and aspiring man from the animal nature was only an obscure preparation and a far-off promise.